Story 1, The Cursed Pages of Whispers Keep. In the heart of London, as the fog clung to the cobblestone streets like a ghostly shroud, there existed an antiquated bookshop known to the locals as Whispers Keep. Owned by a peculiar man named Mr. Harwick, the shop was rumored to harbor secrets of the occult within its musty pages. Mr. Harwick was an oddity, his skin pallid and his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed almost ethereal. The locals whispered that he had been there since the bookshop first opened, yet he had not aged a day. The shop, with its narrow aisles and towering shelves filled with leather-bound tomes, exuded a certain unnerving charm. Miss Elizabeth Harrow, a young governess with an insatiable curiosity for the unknown, stumbled upon the shop one dreary evening. She had heard tales of a book that granted the reader insights into the world beyond, a book said to be bound in human skin and inked in blood. As she entered, the bell above the door chimed, a sound that seemed to echo deeper into the shop than was natural. Mr. Harwick appeared from the shadows, a knowing smile upon his lips. "Good evening, Miss Harrow. What is it that you seek on this solemn night?" His voice was as soft as silk, yet carried an underlying threat like the whisper of a blade. Elizabeth, undeterred by his eerie demeanor, spoke with a firmness that belied her racing heart. "I seek the Book of Esoterica, the one that reveals truths hidden to the mortal eye." Mr. Harwick's smile broadened as he turned and glided between the aisles, beckoning her to follow. "You seek knowledge that is often best left undiscovered. But who am I to deny a quest for understanding? The book you seek resides here, but be warned, its knowledge comes at a price." Elizabeth followed, her steps hesitant as she trailed behind the enigmatic shopkeeper. They arrived at a secluded corner where a single book rested upon a pedestal, its cover grotesque yet alluring. "The price, Mr. Harwick?" she inquired, her hand hovering above the book, yearning to touch it. "Once you know what lies within, there is no return to ignorance. Are you prepared for such a burden?" Elizabeth nodded, her resolve steeling as she opened the cover and began to read. As the first page turned, a chill swept through the room, and the candles flickered as though agitated by an unfelt breeze. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the cryptic text, her mind absorbing the forbidden knowledge that twisted through the pages like a serpent through the grass. Mr. Harwick watched, his eyes reflecting a predatory glint as the room seemed to grow darker, the walls themselves inching closer with each passing moment. Elizabeth was oblivious to the change, her entire being consumed by the words that whispered promises of power and secrets of the dead. Hours passed, the clock's hands spinning unnaturally fast, yet time seemed to stand still within the confines of Whispers Keep. It was only when Elizabeth finally closed the book that the peculiar atmosphere lifted, and she realized the world she returned to was not as she left it. She looked up to find Mr. Harwick, his smile now a grotesque caricature of humanity. "You are now the keeper of knowledge, Miss Harrow. The book is part of you, and you, part of it. The price is paid." A cold dread settled in Elizabeth's heart as she felt her consciousness slipping, her vision fracturing as if she were looking through a shattered mirror. The bookshop twisted before her eyes, revealing a macabre version of itself, with shadows dancing along the walls, forming shapes that were not entirely human. Mr. Harwick's form blurred, and he seemed to multiply, becoming an assembly of ghastly figures that circled around her. "What have you done to me?" Elizabeth cried, her voice a mix of fear and anger. "The book you so desperately sought is cursed. Those who read it become bound to its fate. You are now the guardian of its secrets, and you will reside here, within these walls, until another soul dares to unearth its horrors." The voices of Mr. Harwick echoed around her. Elizabeth's hand flew to her face, and she felt the creeping sensation of age upon her skin. The bookshop was no mere store, it was a prison for those ensnared by their own desires for the arcane. The last thing she saw before her world turned to darkness was the book, closing itself as if satisfied, its whispers quieting for the moment. When the darkness lifted, she was behind the counter, and a customer was entering the shop, the bell chiming with a sound that was now her chain to bear. The knowledge she gained was a torment, visions of other realms and times flooding her mind, but she could never leave, never share it. Was she bound to Whisper's Keep, as its new keeper, and Mr. Harwick? He was never there. He was the book, and the book was a trap for the unwary. Elizabeth Harrow was no more, and in her place stood the new enigmatic owner of the most peculiar bookshop in London, waiting for the next seeker of forbidden truths. Story 2, The Ghost of Gossamer Hall. In the depths of London's fog-laden streets, there existed a mansion known to the locals as Gossamer Hall. The once grand abode now stood dilapidated, its windows like hollow eyes, and its gates forever chained. The tale of Lady Eleanor, who roamed its corridors, was a blend of tragedy and fear, whispered fervently from one generation to the next. Lady Eleanor had been the jewel of Victorian society, her beauty unparalleled, her charm the talk of every ball. Yet, her heart belonged to the enigmatic Lord Avery, a man whose wealth was as mysterious as his past. Their courtship was swift, and they were wed amidst the splendor befitting nobility. However, the grandeur was not to last. It began subtly. Servants spoke of seeing Lady Eleanor wandering the halls at night, her eyes wide with an unspoken terror, her whispers to an unseen presence chilling the bones of those who overheard. Lord Avery dismissed the concerns, attributing them to the overactive imaginations of the help. But the occurrences grew more frequent, more disturbing. Paintings would be found turned to face the wall, as if the subjects themselves could no longer bear witness to the house's unseen horrors. The grand piano in the ballroom played nocturnes with no musician at its bench, and the air grew thick with the scent of roses, though none were grown on the grounds. One fateful night, the boundary between the living and the deceased was torn asunder. A gathering of London's elite filled the halls of Gossamer Hall, a masquerade to celebrate the All Hallows' Eve. The guests, adorned in silks and satins, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks, danced blissfully unaware of the encroaching darkness. As the clock chimed the midnight hour, a scream shattered the gaiety. Lady Eleanor, her visage pale as the moon, stood atop the grand staircase, pointing to a figure shrouded in black. The figure beckoned, its identity obscured by the shadow of death itself. The guests, frozen in terror, could only watch as Lady Eleanor descended the steps, her movements not her own. She followed the figure through the ballroom, past the parlor, and into the depths of the mansion. The guests, spurred into action by the fear of scandal more than concern, searched the mansion but found neither hide nor hair of the lady or her spectral pursuer. As dawn approached, Lord Avery returned from his undisclosed travels to find his home in disarray and his bride missing. The search for Lady Eleanor lasted days, then weeks, with no trace to be found. Lord Avery, consumed by grief and guilt, sealed Gossamer Hall, leaving it to the mercy of time and legend. They say the lady's spirit still roams the mansion, her soul trapped in perpetual torment, reliving her last moments of terror. Years turned to decades, and the story of Lady Eleanor became nothing more than a ghastly bedtime story, until one cold autumn night, a group of daring souls decided to uncover the truth. They were not prepared for what awaited them within the bowels of Gossamer Hall. The group, armed with little more than lanterns and a thirst for the truth, breached the rusted gates of Gossamer Hall. The fog seemed to retreat from the beams of their lights, as if even it dared not enter the forsaken abode. They pushed open the heavy front doors, the creaking sound echoing like a moan through the empty halls. Inside, the mansion was a time capsule of Victorian opulence gone to rot. The wallpaper, once vibrant and gaudy, now hung in tattered strips. Dust lay thick upon every surface, and the air was stale with the scent of decay. Yet, as they ventured deeper, the scent of roses began to weave through the mustiness, growing stronger with each step. In the grand ballroom, the chandeliers swayed gently, as if stirred by the breath of the past. The once polished floor was scratched and marred, but in the dust, there were footprints, small and delicate, as if left by the slippered feet of a lady. They followed the trail, leading them to the staircase where the first ghostly encounter had occurred all those years ago. At the staircase, the temperature dropped, breaths turning to mist in the air. A woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, sang a lullaby that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The melody was hypnotic, pulling them upwards, step by step. At the top, they found the corridor dark and oppressive, and the scent of roses overpowering. A shadow flitted across the wall, a silhouette of a woman in a gown, her movements jerky and unnatural. They pursued the apparition into what was once Lady Eleanor's boudoir. The room was untouched by time, preserved as if she had merely stepped out for a moment. A portrait of her hung above the fireplace, her eyes seeming to follow their every move. Suddenly, the room grew icy, and the lanterns flickered violently. A hush fell over the group as they turned to see the figure of Lady Eleanor materialize before the portrait. She was ethereal, her features marked by an unbearable sadness. She reached out, her voice a mere whisper, "He is here." The group watched in horror as another figure appeared, this one darker, more menacing, the shadowed spectre from the tales. It advanced towards Lady Eleanor, who recoiled in terror, her ghostly hands clutching at something unseen around her neck. The intruders realized they were witnessing the last moments of the lady's life, a life that ended not in escape, but in murder. The malevolent spirit's hands were at her throat, choking the life from her as she had choked on her own terror all those years ago. In a flash of bravery, or perhaps folly, one of the visitors stepped forward, brandishing a cross. The spectre hissed, a sound that seemed to come from the bowels of the earth, and vanished. Lady Eleanor's spirit, released from her eternal torment, gave a smile of gratitude before fading into the light of dawn. The group left Gossamer Hall with the truth, but the truth was a burden heavy to bear. They had uncovered the mystery, but in doing so, they had witnessed a terror beyond their wildest fears, a terror that would haunt their dreams, just as it had haunted the halls of Gossamer Hall for over a century. The story of Lady Eleanor's ghost became more than a whisper, it became a warning. Gossamer Hall stood, its windows still like hollow eyes, a testament to the darkness that lingers in the corners of history, waiting to be awakened. Story 3: The Chimes of Redemption. In the fog-laden streets of Victorian London, there existed a clock tower notorious for its untimely chimes. The tower, an ancient structure of soot-stained stone, loomed over an old cobblestone alley known as Crooked Finger Row. It was said that the chimes of this clock could be heard only by those who bore a heavy burden upon their soul. Our story revolves around a young street urchin named Tim, whose survival in the harsh winters of London was a testament to his cunning and dexterity. But Tim's life of petty theft was about to be shadowed by a haunting melody. One bitter evening, Tim found himself fleeing from an irate vendor, his hands tightly clutching a stolen pocket watch. As he darted into the desolate Crooked Finger Row, the clock tower began to toll. Its deep, resonant chimes rang out, not marking the hour, but seemingly counting down, resonating with the pounding of Tim's heart. He stopped, the cold biting at his skin, as the realization set in, he alone could hear the chimes. Panic set in as he looked up at the grim tower, seeing for the first time the intricate carvings of tormented faces that adorned it. The chimes seemed to beckon him, pulling him toward the tower as if he were bound by invisible threads. Driven by a mixture of fear and an inexplicable compulsion, Tim entered the tower. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of ages, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the echoing ticks that seemed to mock his every step. Ascending the spiraling staircase, Tim reached the chamber of the great clock. And there, in the dim light cast by his flickering candle, he saw them, spirits bound to the mechanisms of the clock, their ethereal forms part of the gears and cogs. A ghostly figure detached itself from the machinery, its eyes hollow with sorrow. It was the spirit of the clockmaker, doomed to maintain the clock for eternity. In hushed tones, he revealed the grim history of the clock, a device not built to tell time, but to count the misdeeds of those who heard its chimes. Each toll was a reminder of one's misgivings, and only by righting those wrongs could the chimes be silenced. Tim, realizing the weight of his own deeds, felt the anguish of the clock's curse. He fled the tower, the echo of the chimes following him, a spectral reminder of his own guilt. From that day forth, Tim could not escape the tolling of the chimes. It haunted his every step, an unyielding spectre of his past. The clock had become his tormentor, a reminder that the shadows of one's deeds were never too far behind. He knew that to silence the chimes, he must amend his ways. Tim's journey of redemption began in the grimy alleys of London, returning what he had stolen, helping those he had wronged. With each good deed, the chimes grew softer, the burden lighter. The clock tower, once an ominous sentinel over Crooked Finger Row, became a beacon of hope for Tim. The spirits entwined within its gears whispered of forgiveness and the chance for a new beginning. And when the last chime faded away, so did the ghostly clockmaker, his smile an echo in the silence, granting Tim release from the chains of the past, the chimes of the damned now silent in the presence of a soul redeemed.